Welcome back, guys. Chris here, and in this video, I want to talk to you about the NetSuite tool CPQ. CPQ stands for Configure Price Quote, and this is a separate module that can be paid for in addition to the native NetSuite software. You bring it in and it adds a bunch of additional configuration and pricing ability for your items. So what do I mean by that? If we're talking about a business that, let's say, sells mice, you can go, let's say, online and you can buy this mouse. It has a certain price to it, and you can either buy it or not. There may be, let's say, 10 other mice that you have as options, but if you choose to buy this one, it's just this, it's got one price, and that's it. It's very simple. Configure Price Quote comes into play if you've got something a little bit more like a laptop, where it can be highly customized. So if we're dealing with a laptop, and if you've ever shopped for either a desktop computer or a laptop, you've probably run into this where you choose a model, some kind of like base upper level decision, and then based on that, you have many additional things that you can select. So for the laptop, you may have the screen size as one option. You then have how much storage memory do you have? You have RAM, a graphics card, all of these other additional features, not to mention entirely maybe external or hardware-based things like a DVD-ROM drive. You can have all these different aspects that you can configure into your laptop when you want to buy it. So Configure Price Quote allows you to go through that process where you don't just have one item, but you have a base item that has all of these different, you could say, permutations or iterations that can be done with it to come out with a highly customized end product that the customer can buy. And the reason it's called Configure Price Quote is because you're configuring what you want or what the customer wants. You then use all those different configurations to determine what is the price for that thing, and then you're able to quote the customer. And that can either be done through a sales representative where you might have a customer on the phone, they're telling you the information, you're putting it in. That's generally for like a business to business relationship. But you can also have direct to consumer where something like a laptop, the consumer goes online, they go through, they individually just for themselves, they put in all their requirements and it automatically tells them what that price is. There doesn't need to be a sales rep involved. So when you're dealing with CPQ and when you're looking at CPQ as potentially something that you want to get, usually the reasons you would want to get it is because you're dealing with products that are very highly customizable. You're dealing with products that have a lot of different price fluctuations, or depending on the features or circumstances in the manufacturing process, there are many different prices that could come out the other end. And as I just mentioned, if not for all businesses, but for some businesses, like if you were selling laptops, if you want the ability to give an instant quote, so if you're shopping online for a laptop and you put in all those requirements, you don't want to get an email at the end saying, we'll let you know in 3 days how much that's going to cost. You want to see real time what the price is for that laptop. So CPQ at least has the ability to do that. Not that all businesses will use that capability, but it has the ability to have that instant feedback of a price for a customer if they're looking at it online, or even if they're calling through a sales rep, the sales rep can at least see that thing real time and they can either verbally tell the customer what the price would be, or they can send them a more formalized quote. So these are all reasons why using a module like CPQ can be very, very helpful, and in some cases is almost mandatory for the business model. It's really a major step up from using the native item matrix feature that NetSuite has. Item matrices or matrices is used more if you have something like a t-shirt where it's got 3 different sizes, maybe 5 different colors. So you can make a matrix of all the different sizes by the colors, and you can use that for the sales process. But when we're talking about CPQ, it's like item matrices on steroids. There's so many more iterations, so many more different actions and paths that can be taken, requiring something much more sophisticated. So with all of that in mind, let's actually take a look at how CPQ looks in the system. So here we are in a demo account. This is a demo account specifically for CPQ. And so if I come over here, my laptop has a small screen, so it's kind of crunched over to the side. Notice right here we have this tab configurator. If you normally get CPQ, it generally will come out of the box with the tab just literally saying CPQ on it. This demo account just had that custom change to say configurator instead. There's no difference. It's the same exact thing. You would come here and you've got a few different things here, but first I want to show you what is the final result that you might see. So you really get a concept of what are we trying to achieve and how could that be? And so we're going to come to product and I'm going to click on standalone. So this is standalone CPQ products. So let's go back to the example I gave with a laptop. In the instance of a laptop, if you're selling custom configured laptops, generally speaking, you would have certain base models. Like, for example, you could have a gaming computer, or you could have a mini computer mainly for travel, or an office or work computer, or a larger computer that's really meant to just sit at home and be more almost like a desktop, but it's in a laptop form. You could have all of these as these base modules. Each one of these would be its own CPQ product. And so what we're seeing here, each one of these is its own CPQ product. In this particular case, because it's a demo account, it's trying to show off so many different ways that CPQ can be. Instead of being gaming computer, office computer, mini computer, etc., these are all products that are completely different. No business would ever have CPQ products for custom doors and also farm equipment and tubing and contracted services. It's a completely random assortment of product types. They're trying to deliberately show the many different ways you could have a CPQ product. So in this particular case, let's open up a few of these. I'll open up and then we'll do furniture. So let's take a look first at farm equipment. I believe that was this first one. And we'll get a concept of what does CPQ actually look like. And the first thing I want to point out is everything that you see on this page, and you'll notice in a minute, this is not how it's always going to look. You can highly configure the setup of CPQ and how it flows, the various organization of the questions, the aesthetic of the page. All of that can be customized. And keep in mind, as I mentioned before, you can have a CPQ setup that is either accessed by internal, so that would be your own sales reps, etc., or you can have a setup that is web hosted, so it's something that customers can log into. And again, you can make it like a normal, highly aesthetic web page that fits with your brand image and style. You can customize all of these things. So this is a very simple approach, but you will see as we go through the other products, you can customize and make it look quite different. And you can make it look a lot more impressive if you want to. It really just depends how much time you put into it. So in this case, we're dealing with farm equipment. These are like tractors and combines, things like that. So you can see there's a title here, agricultural equipment, and we have questions set up. So these are some basic questions that are saying, okay, well, what is the class of product that we're dealing with? So let's say we select one, and you don't need to know anything about tractors. Just understand the concept of what we're dealing with and how this could apply to anything. So once we select a class, we then have several different models that we can choose from. So you can see we have harvesters, we have shredders, we have all kinds of different products. Each one has a photo. That's pretty common. So let's pick this. There was one particular shredder I wanted to select. I think it was this one. Yeah. Okay, so we have this wheeled horizontal grinder shredder, big piece of tractor machinery. Notice as soon as we selected that, it pulls up the image of the thing, and then we get all of these additional questions on the right. Now, in this case, it was configured so that it knows based on what you selected, it gives you a bunch of specifications related to that thing. Again, if you're doing a laptop, it would provide a lot of specifications about what you have in the laptop so far. And then we have all of these additional questions that will delineate how are we configuring this particular product. So for this shredder, what kind of engine do we want? Now, in this case, it's actually funny. It's only giving us seemingly one option, which is kind of stupid. You would never have a question where you just have one option. So actually, if I select that, it changed something over here. It re-updated this info summary of basically almost like line items on the order. It goes, okay, now you're adding this engine. This engine cost, in this case, $34,000. So it's totaling it up real time. What is that final price for the combine going to be? And as soon as I selected that, notice it actually gave me two options. So this is actually a great example of an incorrectly set up CPQ where there should have been two options right from the get-go, but because whoever set up this demo account didn't do it fully correctly, they set it up where it's only showing one option in the beginning and you had to select one option before it suddenly gives you the option of two different things. So that's kind of amusing. And we'll talk a little bit later about implementation and the various problems you can run into with that and how difficult it can be to do a CPQ implementation. But here we go. We got two options. So let's select one of these. And we'll go down. So we have other things. Again, you don't need to know what any of this stuff is, but get the concept and try to imagine for your business the various questions and the features you would have included. So in this case, we've got colorizer. We can select one. We've got a dolly. I'll pick a different one on that. Now notice this is an interesting feature. This was specified so that if I chose this kind of, maybe it was the engine or the colorizer, it then barred me from selecting this dolly. Notice I have that little red circle with the line through it. So I can't choose that dolly. I have to choose a different one. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and limiting what you can do in a second. But for now, we'll just select a different one. Now, as we go through this, every time we're adding things, it's updating this information side where it's adding on these line items and how much those things are going to cost. In some instances, things you're going to select are not necessarily going to add a cost. You can set up all of these different rules in terms of how this plays out for the price of the product. I'd also like to point out, I think it's a little bit later down here. In this particular case, so far as we've been going, as we select things, each question is almost like standalone, where you can choose one engine and you can choose any one of these colorizers or any one of these hoppers, etc. But oftentimes when you're producing something, it'll start to be more like a tree where depending on what you select, you'll have these 3 options. Or if you selected a different type of engine, you might have 4 other type of colorizers that are accessible for that type of engine. Not in reality, but you can understand the concept. So for example, if I pick tooth configuration, if I change it from full to half set, notice it immediately changed the next question down from being 1 question to now, if it's half set, this means there's 2 halves. So now we have 2 tooth packages. So here I can select indexable, and here I can use chisel teeth, whatever that means. So I'm putting in all these things, and at some points there's a fork in the road where a decision made earlier will influence what can be done later down the chain. So all of these things are very highly customizable as you go through this. So that gives you a concept of how this would work, in this case for farm equipment. But let's take a look at another iteration of a CPQ product. We're gonna come up to this next one. And this is tubing systems. So notice the setup and the way this is visually laid out is completely different. So in this case, we have all of these different types of tubes. This looks like plumbing tubes that we can select. Then we have certain smart parts. You can pull up smart parts. This might be something that more a contractor can access on a website. They're familiar with the tubing parts, the T-bars, etc. And they can come in and select the elbows or the 3-ways, etc. It changes the picture for them. They can go in and change the tubing dimensions, etc. It's as they go through it, there's special options. You can add images throughout the page, images on the right, all the summary information here on the right. So that gives you a concept of how it might work for something like plumbing. Let's go to the 3rd option here, and this is desk furniture. So here we can see a photo of the desk. This is more of a generic photo here, but let's select a desk at random. I think there was one. Oh, so this is another interesting aspect. You can customize it where, notice as I hover over certain ones, it has this little pop-up that says coming soon. So you can put that in where if you're going to a certain option, it's not even going to let you, it's going to show you that it's there, but you can't access it, but it will at least provide you some sort of a text box to give you additional information like coming soon or out of stock, etc. The one I wanted to look at, I don't actually, wasn't this one in particular, but that's fine. We can take this as an example. I'm going to come down here. Notice it gives us these options similar to the piping where we can say, well, we want a straight line. We want an L shape. This might be for an individual customer, or it might be business to business. Maybe you're ordering 80 different desks right of this category. And again, okay, so this is another example where they have these little pop-up boxes that I can't even access these two unless I contact customer service. So you can add on all these things. All right, so we're gonna go to another product here. We're gonna go to the T2300. I wanted to pull up this other product for a couple reasons. Notice that for this product, while I can show things like the straight desk and the L shape, and there's ones like this where it simply bars us from going to them and it says, hey, you need to contact customer service. I do have this U-shape option and I can click on this, and instead of straight up barring me from it, what it does is it gives me this validation error on the right. And in this case, it's not giving us a lot of info, but you can code it to actually provide exact specifications of the problem. The reason you might want to go this route of not barring someone or removing options from the table, but allowing someone to select something and then tell them why that thing is not going to work, which is basically setting up these validations, that can be very useful because you allow people to at least see what can be chosen, but then specify that it cannot be built. So there's reasons why they would not be able to go forward with it. if we take our example of the laptop, if someone selects a crazy complicated or high-end graphics card and RAM, but then chooses the smallest, worst quality fan, you could have a validation built in that says, listen, for the amount of heat that your hardware is going to generate, your fan is not going to be able to keep up with that based on the configuration that you just made. So that's fine. You can either choose a higher fan or choose a smaller graphics card and still be able to make this laptop. But we want to make you aware of the fact that this is a problem and we will not be able to build whatever you've just configured. So you can add in these warnings, or in this case, it's an actual block, but you can actually add it where you can still go through with the configuration. It's just giving you a warning that is not optimum. There's something that is not preferable about what you're choosing. So you can see how many different things you can start customizing with this. I want to show the last option that we have here of a CPQ product. So this is an example, in my opinion, not a very aesthetically made one, of a custom windows and doors company and what they have. The reason I wanted to point out this one particularly is because I want to talk a little bit about the images. Obviously, an element of having CPQ is you want to provide some imagery of what the person is configuring and what that thing is going to look like. For a laptop, it doesn't really matter, but especially when you're dealing with things like tractors or doors or desks and stuff like that, you would want to see what the thing is that you're dealing with. So there's actually a few different ways you can add the imagery and utilize that. You can have straight up things like this where it's simply one image that was included. Same thing with the furniture. It's just every piece of furniture individually, they just took one photo of it. And I can actually go back to that for a second. If I go to the desk here for a second, so this is a picture of a desk. Now notice in this particular case, if I switch the desk width and the depth and all these things, notice the image is not changing at all. So what they've done is they've chosen to have one image for every major desk type, and then all the other specifications don't change the image at all. Even if I come in here and I change the color, notice the desk isn't changing. So that's not optimum. A lot of people will choose to do an option where if I change the width size, that won't change the image. But if I choose a different color, it'll add a little skin to it. So it doesn't look perfect. It doesn't actually look what it will look like in real life, but it'll add kind of like a fake brown skin to it. So you at least get somewhat of a concept of what the desk will look like. Many people choose to do that. You can also, the most complicated way to do it, which some larger companies that are willing to spend the money to do this, you can actually get someone in a warehouse with every single iteration of desk and just swap out every desk and take a new photo. So you have a unique photo for every single iteration. That is very difficult to do, but it obviously looks the most high quality and it's the best proper representation of all the features that you can choose. So that's one way to do it. Another way, though, that you should be aware of is you can do a layered approach. So you can have, I've seen this, for example, you could do it with something like this, where you can have a photo, like a background photo, which in this case you could have the room and the door, or let's say if you just had a standalone door, you don't have that whole environment. But if you just had a door, but then additional things can be later on, like for example, the windows. These cutout translucent windows, that might be another image layer of just these 3 translucent windows, or maybe there's a version where it's just 2 or 1. Every one of those is a different layer. So depending on what you select on your CPQ, it will layer those, whatever the relevant photo is, on top of it. So suddenly the black door will now look like the black door with one window cut out. I've seen this done with, for example, a company that makes not custom, but they produce officers' uniforms for police departments. So they'll make the uniforms with the badge and the name tag and the chevrons for the rank, K9 unit, all of these different things. So that's a great example where you can have the shirt itself is the background layer, the image really. So there can be like a dark blue long sleeve or another one that's short sleeve, or you can have one that's a khaki, whatever. That would be the background image depending on the major shirt that they select. And then if you choose rank as sergeant, it's going to overlay just an image of chevrons onto that image of the shirt. So it's going to overlay that. So you start to get an image of what that officer's uniform will look like. And you can select a bunch of different things and it'll all just overlay those images on top of the base image of the dark blue long sleeve shirt. So it's really helpful. These are, you wouldn't create the images in NetSuite. You would do them in another software like GIMP. But then once you have the images and the layers ready to go, you can easily bring those into NetSuite and have a pretty comprehensive system to show a visual element of what you're talking about and what you're showing in your CPQ setup. So that's everything that we can see, and really that I'm going to show you in this instance of the final product. Now let's take a look a little bit more underneath the hood. What is going on here and how does this thing get configured? So we're going to come over back to our original NetSuite page, and I'm going to come back over here on the right. We'll go to the configurator, and this time instead of going to the product standalone, we're going to come over here to product maintenance. So I'll click on that. So this still shows us the product list, but now instead of showing the pretty version where we can actually walk through the configurator, we're actually looking at the settings that go into these products. So let's take a look at our farm equipment. We're going to come here and we're going to edit this CPQ product. So you can really start to get an understanding of how complex the implementation is and how many different elements go into it. So we've got some basic information on top. And by the way, I'm not doing a detailed walkthrough of like how to learn how to do these configurations. I just want to give you a concept of the various elements that they have. So really what makes a CPQ product is the first thing is the questions. So you can see here we have a tab for questions. And in this case, you can see we have dozens of questions just for this product. So you can see if I come back to that tractor, we've got things like the colorizer, we've got the engine, etc. So if I come to the questions, you can see we have things like the colorizer, etc. So we can see all this information for it, etc. And I can open up that question. And so I've got it here now. So this is a specific record. It's not just a setting on the CPQ product of a tractor. This is its own record called a CPQ question called colorizer. And within this question, if I come down here, I've got various answers. So these answers are the same things that if I go to the tractor itself and I select colorizer, notice I've got these options. These options are the same thing we're seeing here, all listed out as answers. So for every question that you create, you have to then go in and create an additional record called a CPQ question answer. You make all of those, you have various features and information you have to put in for them. You put images attached to them, etc. And then in addition to that, you will have, if we come back out to the question, notice on the right here, notice this rule. If I scroll down here, you'll see some better examples of rules. So you can see them here. Rules are, you'll see them in a number of different places in the CPQ configuration. These rules are, they probably look to you, if you're not a developer, they look like programming language, and it is. It is a type of programming language that is unique to this exact product, and I don't mean the tractor, I mean the CPQ product. You've got these very unique rules using this programming language that you formulate for each of these questions. You have rules tied to answers. You can have rules in all different types of things. And these rules are really what's dictating how the system is operating. If you're choosing one selection, how that would bar you from going to other ones, or it might have a window pop up. All of these different more unique specifications are all used and put into action by these rules that you set. So you just start to get the concept of you've got dozens of different questions. Each question has many different answers. Each of those answers might have rules that dictate certain configurations that work, certain ones that don't. If we come up here, you can see we have validations over here. So this is where you can go in and you can specify these are certain rules that we have where if you try to put these certain iterations together, it's going to either block you or it's going to hide those options, or potentially it's going to allow you to go through with them, but it's going to warn you that there is a problem for doing that. And again, notice we've got these rules that are set up using this custom language to make sure that it's executing this thing properly. We also have other things like actions. So these are depending on certain things that you do in the CPQ system. What is it going to then push you to, or what are some things that it might do in the background? You can also tie this into your manufacturing process, such as we have the materials tab here. So what are the components and things that are going into the manufacturing of this product that you are customizing? What is the routing for that procedure? All of these different things. You've got pricing. We've got the composite images that I talked about where you have, let's say, the officer's uniform and you want to layer on badges, chevrons, things like that. You can do all of that. So many different options here. It is a really in-depth and I would say complex implementation process. So just be aware that underneath the hood, while it looks pretty and it's easy to come to something like this and say, wow, this is amazing. This is exactly what we need. And I would agree, CPQ is a robust product. It can do a lot of different things. And for a lot of companies, this is like a dream come true because this is exactly what they want. Whether it's B2B or B2C, this is how they want to handle their sales process. And that's great. It's fantastic when it's done, but there is that whole process to get to this point that can be quite involved. But now let's take a step back and talk a little bit more about CPQ in general, some of the things you should know about the implementation process, pitfalls you should avoid, etc. And before we go into any great detail, I want to give you a little bit of a background about the CPQ product because it's going to help you understand some of the things I talk about later. So first off, CPQ as a product was actually made by a company called Verenia, separate from Oracle NetSuite. And they had this product, it obviously integrated in with NetSuite. And as Oracle NetSuite does with many products, they acquired Verenia and the CPQ product in 2022. So they bought it a few years ago, and although they acquired it at that time, it only rolled out as an official NetSuite product called CPQ in 2024. So just a year ago, this thing actually rolled out. It's a very, very new product, and the entire ecosystem is really trying to kind of catch up and learn what is this thing, how does it work, and how do we implement it more importantly. So with that in mind, now let's talk a little bit about the implementation process and some things you should know about that. So first off, when you're trying to do a CPQ implementation, even if it's considered a very simple CPQ implementation, when we're talking about simplicity, there's a sort of a minimum requirement because obviously you're not going to have something that's so simple where you choose one option and then there's 3 variations that you can choose. If you've got something that simple, you're going to go with an item matrix in the first place. You don't need CPQ. So there's a sort of a lowest rung option where it's complex enough that item matrices cannot fulfill your requirements. You need something like CPQ, but it's still very, very simple from a CPQ standpoint. If you've got a setup like that, I would still say, even with the absolute lowest requirements you might have from the system, you're still going to be looking at probably 100 hours plus of an implementation. It is a beefy implementation. I'll explain a little bit more why that can be so involved, but think with that as the absolute minimum that you might run into. You can easily have 500 hours or more on an implementation of a more, I would say, standard CPQ setup, the kinds of things that we've been looking at. So be aware of that. It is involved. It has taken quite a bit of time. And because the product is so new in the NetSuite ecosystem, there is this dearth or a lack of experience using the product, not just from the clients, but also from, first off, Oracle NetSuite. Their team, the Oracle NetSuite team, both from the implementers as well as from the sales reps, actually know quite little about the product. The sales reps are going to be able to tell you what it is and what it does and obviously what the price of it is. But in terms of understanding the more intricate details about it and some things that you should be aware of in relation to it, they tend to just refer you to other people because they don't actually have that much familiarity with it. It's new in their ecosystem, and so they're still coming to grips with it. Then when you're looking for consulting companies in the more general ecosystem between alliance partners and solution providers, very, very few companies have any experience doing a CPQ implementation. I know many, many companies. I'm not going to claim to know all the different implementers, but of all the companies that I'm aware of, there's only a small handful of companies that have any capability or experience doing a CPQ implementation, and only one of which I know of that has done at least enough implementations successfully that I would feel comfortable recommending them as someone who's actually has a proven track record with this type of implementation. So just be aware, again, it's a fantastic product, but you have to be very careful and selective in terms of who you're partnering with to make sure that you have a successful implementation. Because Oracle NetSuite's not going to be doing you any favors. They're not going to be providing a lot of great support. And if you don't get a partner that does know how these things work, and as I pointed out before, that custom language that they use for all the rules, that's not something that anyone knows. knows. You have to get someone who's specifically trained on how to use CPQ and knows that exact language to be able to work with that system. So that is something you should keep in mind for sure. Another aspect that is important to know when you're going through the implementation process is that the meat of the implementation, that the time consumption, is a lot of it taken up just collecting and accumulating and also scrubbing the data necessary to make CPQ work in the first place. So if you've got, let's say, 15 different CPQ products, each one of them has 10 different questions, 5 answers on average per, lots of validations, images, all these different things. You can imagine if you're looking at like a tree or a diagram, this thing gets wild complicated. There can be thousands of iterations that are possible. And to do that, to even having it in the system in the first place, it requires first knowing from the company standpoint themselves, what are all the various iterations? What does happen if we select this engine with this colorizer and that hopper and that shredder? How does that all play out? What is possible? Can we even make a tractor that does that? All of these things have to be asked of the company themselves and then put into spreadsheets. Just accumulating all of that knowledge and on the various iterations that can happen, that has to be done before you can even start the configuration process. And that tends to be the largest portion of the process. Because the consultants, especially if they're being paid, they're more than happy to go in and do the legwork of setting things up, but they can't start unless they know what they do not know, which is your setup, your various ramifications of certain selections. So you're going to have to put all that stuff together. The consultants will generally help you with that. They will also help you to scrub the data, make sure that there aren't inconsistencies or wrong fields. It's very easy to put things in that are incorrect. So you want to make sure the data is accurate. The last thing you want to do is just dump a bunch of information into NetSuite CPQ and then not be sure that it's accurate and then have to go back and start to tweak information. That is highly unadvisable. You want to make sure that it's very, very accurate in the beginning before you go live with a CPQ setup. So that is another thing to keep in mind. And one thing you should know in relation to that, which may apply to you if you're watching a video like this, if you already have a CPQ setup, even if you're just doing it out of Excel spreadsheets, if you at least have some kind of already in use CPQ product, and you now want to move on to NetSuite CPQ, you are miles ahead because you most likely have already assembled a lot of that information. Maybe it's not perfect, but you have at least thought with it. You've done these Excel spreadsheets of all these different iterations, etc. That's so much of the legwork. So if you've already got something put together, really can put you forward. And be aware that oftentimes what will happen in the implementation is that once the data is accumulated, you have everything ready to go, it's been scrubbed, you are recognizing that it's accurate. Oftentimes the consulting company will start the configuration, they'll start setting up the more complex things, and they'll walk your guys through, okay, for this particular CPQ item, how do you import and bring in the questions? How do you bring in the answers? How do you set up the validation rules? These things are not that complicated. I mean, they're definitely not easy, but they can be understood by people that are not necessarily full-blown consultants. They can show and walk you through that side of things. And then what I've seen is, because it can be quite tedious and take a lot of time to bring in every question, every answer, etc., the consultants can really set the hard stuff up, show them how to do it, and then a lot of times the client will save on the cost of consulting by doing a lot of the legwork themselves. So they've not only accumulated the data, but they'll bring the data into the system. All right, so that gives you a concept of the implementation process. Now I want to talk briefly about some of the pitfalls you should avoid if you're deciding you want to move forward with an implementation. First off, and I have talked about this before, but make sure that your information is entirely scrubbed and fully accurate before you bring it into the system. That is probably the biggest time waster that I've ever seen companies run into, is they just rush to bring the info in because they want to see things, they want to really see and feel like they're actually building out their system. So they put something together hastily, it's not fully fleshed out, there are fields that are incorrect, someone was just drag and dropping fields, not paying attention, there's incorrect information, and then you might not immediately realize there's problems. You find them about much later. Now you got to get someone to go in and fix those one by one. That is incredibly tedious, and it just bloats the entire process of implementing it. So scrub that data, make sure it's accurate. The second thing to be aware of is when importing information in, this is actually one of the reasons the implementations can be such a pain in the first place. The CSV importer that NetSuite has, for whatever reason, I don't want to get into the technicalities of it, but it actually has a hard time with and can't properly recognize when you're bringing in the information like the questions, answers, and rules. Because of that unique programming language that you use, when it's importing the rules, it doesn't recognize it properly, and it will bring the field into NetSuite. So it'll look like you have the rule there, but it doesn't properly, I guess you could say, process it so that the rule is actually executing as it should. So it will look fine, and you won't really have any indication that it's not going fine until you actually start working with it and you realize, wait a second, this rule is supposed to specify that we're pulling in this BOM and it's putting it on and it's adding to the cost and whatever. And it's not doing that at all because that rule didn't process effectively with the CSV imports. So generally speaking, you're not able to do CSV imports to bring in that information. Maybe NetSuite will update that in the future where they'll handle that aspect and it will be able to. As of right now, and I know this sounds like a nightmare, and it is, you have to bring these things in individually. So every question, answer, rule, validation, a photo, everything has to be manually brought into the system. That is what makes these implementations tend to take quite a bit of time, in addition to just aggregating and pulling all the information together in the first place. Now, as I mentioned before, there is one company that I'm aware of that has quite a proven track record with CPQ implementations, and I know that they came up with their own proprietary importer that brings it almost like on a VIA, where you can still bring the information in. It will have those rules come into NetSuite in a way that they will properly be recognized and they will properly execute. So there is a solution, but that's the only one that I'm aware of. So there's ways to get around it, but just be aware, if you just go with a straight import through NetSuite CSV, you can run into problems using that. Other pitfall I'd like to mention, this is one that I've seen pretty frequently, is customers try to bring together several products together that are not compatible. So generally speaking, the rule of thumb is it's better to split things into multiple CPQ products as opposed to trying to bring them all into one product. Almost like what we ran into and what we were looking at with the farm tractors, where we just had one CPQ product of farm tractors, and in that we selected all these different models. I would never recommend that. I would have each major model split out as its own CPQ product, and then you have the questions and answers relevant to that model. As soon as you start bringing things, even though it might seem desirable, especially if you're dealing with direct to consumer, where you just want one product that they're selecting, like tractor, and then they have all these models, first off, it's much more difficult to configure. Also, it's much easier to break. It's a more fragile system where if there's rules that are going wrong, it can make the entire thing not work, as opposed to just having one product, or you can even have one product and other things that can come off that product can be split off as another CPQ product. And so if there's some coding problem in that, it's only going to affect that one thing. It's not going to affect what might end up being, if properly configured, that could be 6 different CPQ products. So generally, I recommend don't try to shove incompatible things into one product. I know this video is getting very long. I apologize. I wanted to give you enough information so that you understood both what CPQ looks like, how it operates, a little bit of the background of it, as well as some of the things you might need to consider if you are looking at an implementation. So I hope that this gave you some more understanding and ability to decide if CPQ is right for you. If so, then please hit that like button, subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. And if you have any remaining questions on CPQ, I don't claim to be an absolute expert on the subject, but I do know quite a bit. So feel free to reach out to me by email. I will answer any questions that I can. And with all of that in mind, I hope to see you in the next video.